Hello, everyone. Welcome to Brownish Parenting with Dr. Amita on Ruckus Avenue Radio. This show unveils modern Desi parenting topics and explores the latest research for raising our bicultural children. Last week, we talked to sexologist and sex therapist Moushami Ghosh about the importance of talking to your kids about sex education topics and really having authentic, honest, and open conversations with our children. If you didn't get a chance to hear that, please go back and check out that episode. This week, we want to extend that conversation to think about what keeps South Asian Americans in unhealthy relationships. And this could be because divorce is so taboo in our culture. And so individuals often feel stuck between a rock and a hard place. Today, we want to talk about this highly stigmatized topic of divorce and why divorce is such a big no-no in our culture. We want to provide support to couples who are also married to understand how every marriage and healthy relationship is going to have its ups and downs. So in our discussion, we're also going to look at the 7 phases or stages of marriage. Finally, I want us to think about ways we can prepare our children to know that marriage and Disney's idea of living happily ever after really does require individuals learning how to trust one another, have mutual respect for one another. You have to have skills like good communication skills, emotional regulation skills, and conflict resolution skills. So let's start by exploring South Asian culture and the messages children receive about getting married. So many parents feel like their job is not done until their children are settled. You often hear parents saying things like, I will be happy when, and that when is when their child is married, and then has their own children. And so children often feel like they don't want to burden or worry their parents anymore. And so they feel like this pressure to get married sometimes before they're ready to get married. And so we want to have this conversation because we want to help children do what's best for them and not do it because they're trying to make their parents happy. And South Asian children often do grow up to be people pleasers because they've been taught from an early age to be other oriented. And so they're taught to think about others before they think about themselves. And that is something that we want to address today. We want to also talk about how South Asian culture looks at marriage as this lifelong commitment that is sacred and filled with lots of obligations and expectations. And so divorce is often considered that final straw. But what is that final straw? And that's typically what South Asian individuals just don't know. In a research study done by the National Institute of Health, they actually looked at what that final straw looks like. And for many individuals and couples, it was infidelity, domestic violence, and substance abuse. But they also note that the top 3 reasons why couples are getting divorced today are number 1, that lack of commitment to one another. The second one was infidelity and extramarital affairs. And the third one was too much conflict and arguing. So today we want to take a look at some of the reasons why individuals get divorced. We want to take a look at how our identity plays a role. And when I did my own research study, my research participant from my dissertation mentioned that when her own South Asian parents got divorced, first, this was a major life experience for her in terms of growing up and what she went through. It influences who she is today, what her thoughts and beliefs are about marriage and divorce. But also she notes that because divorce was so taboo in our culture, that when her parents were going through a divorce, she felt more connected to her American identity, which was more accepting of it. And because of that, when her parents made this decision, she felt like a bad Indian because her parents were letting down this community and not sticking with their marriage. So this leads me to address the question with you all today. Why should parents think about how they talk to their children about marriage and divorce? Because we do want children to not disconnect with their South Asian identity. If they needed to get a divorce, they should feel like the South Asian community is there to support them. And so I do also want to note that this episode is not advocating for divorce. Rather, it is stating that we teach our children what they should look for in a marriage, like true partnership in life, someone who makes you better, having those communication skills, conflict resolution skills to build those healthy relationships. So we are going to pause for a break. And when we come back, we are going to talk to our guest, Shailee Mehta, the author of Indians Don't Get Divorced, about her experiences being raised as a second generation South Asian American and the messages she received about marriage from a young age. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You are listening to Brownish Parenting with Dr. Amita on Ruckus Avenue Radio. We left off talking about South Asian American culture and the messages we may receive from our culture when it comes to getting married and getting divorced. So today I am so excited to bring you our guest, Shailee Mehta. And Shailee Mehta is a skilled accountant, a distinguished folk and classical Indian dancer, devoted parent, and emerging novelist. Her debut, Indians Don't Get Divorced, offers a deep dive into personal and cultural complexity. Shailee has also experienced a divorce before and is an advocate for discussing this topic with others in our community to break the stigma around divorce and to help other individuals who are going through it. So I really want to thank Shailee for being here today and being really open and vulnerable as she guides us through her own journey. So I'm very excited to get into this with you. I read your fabulous book, Indians Don't Get Divorced, and those five fictional characters that get divorced, it was just fascinating to read about each and every one of them. I felt like as a second generation South Asian American myself, I could really relate to, the couple that, had been childhood friends that got married. And then I was like, what's going to happen in their story? There was a couple that was dating in college. There was a couple who had this pressure to get married from their parents and, went into this arranged marriage. And I was just really invested in those characters. I want to thank you for putting that book out there for everyone. And I just wanted to have you tell us a little bit more about it. How, these characters were maybe influenced by your own life experiences as well.
Yeah. Well, I think all of us know a version of all of the characters, right? Like we've all grown up in Indian American communities. Family friends was such a staple, I think, for a lot of us growing up. And we had our friends and our Indian clubs in college, the pressure to get married,
Mhm.
meeting people through friends, we all know somebody who's done it. And this day and age, even people who've gotten married through, Shaadi.com or Match.com or, an online version. So I think every story has parts of me in it. The emotional breakdowns, what you're feeling, the pressure you feel from families and parents. But, there are also individual stories about what other people have gone through. And I bet there's a version that almost everyone out there can, to some degree, relate to.
Yeah, no, it was so eye-opening, like how you talk about those Indian clubs that we were part of, the family friends. I grew up in a Bengali community. I was part of the Indian club in college. And so really like just thinking about this story of how these individuals meet and how complicated relationships can really be. As we talk a little bit about our experiences growing up, because, I grew up in Walnut Creek. And I just wanted you to maybe tell our listeners a little bit more about where you grew up and how you connected to your South Asian American identity. That was, was difficult for me in the mostly Caucasian community that I grew up in. So just, I always wonder how it is for everyone that grew up here as a second generation.
Yeah, no, and it took me a long time to realize how unique our experiences, that a lot of the things we grew up with hasn't been done before until we came along. I grew up in Los Angeles and I'm still living in Los Angeles. So there was definitely two sides to me. My school never had more than a couple of Indian people, and yet I was fully immersed in our culture because my parents had a whole family friend circle that was based on their dental college,
Mm.
that had all immigrated to Los Angeles from India. And so these are people they essentially know since their early 20s that had kids settle down, and that was the group I grew up with. And that's where, the Indian movies, the dancing, Garba,
Yeah.
Holi, all of that comes from there. But then I go to school and none of that exists anymore. That divide had been there, and I loved Indian movies. I still do. My parents introduced me at when I was 9 years old. They told me Ashiki, where Anu Agarwal wears that
I
white dress.
love Ashiki. Yeah.
Yeah, she's Cinderella. So
Yeah.
watch it,
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was
Absolutely.
it. I was
I think
in.
I
I was
watched that like
all,
20 times. Yeah. That
oh, I mean,
the
I
soundtrack is fabulous. Yes. Yeah.
exactly. And then, Ashiki happened, Maine Pyar Kiya, Dil Hai Kya
Yeah.
Mata Nahi. Like we were straight in Khan territory for
Yes.
all great, romantic,
Yeah.
filmy, lifetime. Like it was, that's what I grew up with. But I dove straight into Hindi movies. So I was all about the songs. And it's not that I didn't listen to American music or,
Mhm.
I into that stuff too, because it was really good in the 90s here too. Um,
So thinking
but
about, yeah, so I like thinking about just like how you're talking about like Dil Hai Ke Manta Nahi, like all those movies, right? Mere Pyar Kiya, um,
mhm.
that romantic storyline, right? I'm just thinking like, yeah, how did that play a role in the messages that you received? So watching those movies was one, but then did you ever hear like from your parents or community members about like marriage and when you should get married or if you should get married or any of that?
Um, I don't think I directly ever heard it. I think the
Uh,
idea is that you go to school, you go to high school, you go to college, you get your degree, and if you're pursuing further education, you go do that. And then as soon as you've gotten that goal, it's marriage time. It was almost just implied because that's what our parents did. That's what, you know, every generation up until us did. But the
mhm,
end goal in every single movie was marriage. And that definitely, thank God, has changed now.
mhm.
But that's the structure and the influence I grew up under.
Through these storylines, what a lot of it had to do with marriage. And I still hear teens today that are speaking the same language we're speaking, when we were growing up, that they have this goal of getting married. And I wonder if they think more about like what they're looking for in a marriage. Because there's this goal of getting married, but then what does married life actually then look like? Uh,
Right.
so we'll get into that. So let's go ahead and break right now. And when we come back, I want to address more about, South Asians. We'll continue our conversation on marriage, but also think a little bit more about maybe messages we received about divorce. So from our parents or community members, like what have we heard about divorce? Welcome back. You're listening to Brownish Parenting with Dr. Amita on Ruckus Avenue Radio. We are here with Shailee Mehta, the author of Indians Don't Get Divorced. So we're going to dive in now to looking at South Asian culture and divorce. So thinking a little bit about like if we grew up with individuals in our lives that were divorced, how they served maybe as models and maybe like the messages we received about divorce. I knew very few. I know my uncle did get divorced, but it was always very hush hush. Like you didn't know what was happening behind the scenes, why it was happening. It was just sort of stated and you moved on. So I'm wondering how it was for you.
Um, in terms of role models, I did not know anybody that was out there and divorced. But what we found out when I started going through it, my mom would reach out to, friends she had just to have somebody to vent to almost and to kind of share with what she's dealing with, on my end. And she found out that she had some friends that had gone through it, that were in their second marriage that was, infinitely longer. And it was not something to bring up anymore. If you divorce your first person or your first partner at, within 5, 10 years, and then you've had a second marriage for 25 years, why would that first person ever even come up?
Yeah.
And so she actually learned a lot about some of her friends in the time that I was going through it. Um, I think, unfortunately, there wasn't anyone I could directly talk to about it. When I first started going through it, my mom did introduce me to one person she did know, an Indian man who had gone through it, and was like, just talk to him. And very vividly, the first piece of advice he gave me is get a therapist. And so that was there. Outside of that, we didn't really keep in touch very much, but it was a great piece of advice. And it took me a while to take it, but I did eventually, and I still talk to that same therapist today.
That's great.
Um,
Yeah.
but the part where I lucked out on is two of my really close girlfriends are MFTs.
Yeah.
And, you know, I have the group of Indian girlfriends I have are very progressive, liberal, open-minded women, whether they've gone through it or not. And so I had that as support, um, regardless of knowing how my parents would feel about it. I knew I had that as backup because they weren't gonna judge me for it. Now, that's not to say I didn't get judged from other places,
Yes. Yes.
but at least that core group that I'm still in touch with today, even if we're, doing our own things, that was there at that time and is still there
And
now.
they were married. So MFTs are marriage and family therapists, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
So
Oh, that's so great to have that. And for him to also come forth and be able to say, hey, like get a therapist. So
yeah,
meaning that he was able to come out and say, I've seen a therapist. Because again, that is very stigmatized, especially for men to be
yeah.
able to say that they went to go talk to someone. And
Hmm.
and not everybody did back then. Like you were talking about your mom's friends. And I wonder if some of them just kind of shoved it under the rug and didn't want to go there, didn't want to think about it or reflect on it. They just kind of oftentimes want to move on
Right.
and not think through, what's happened. But it's so important to be able to do that. So
Yeah, and I think if
yeah,
you're open about it, like I've had a few discussions with people who've either gone through broken engagements or I mean even think about divorce. And it's not that they will all lead to that. It's just they need somebody who's gone through it to be able to kind of give them their thoughts, just to give them perspective. So, but they knew they could come to me then because I wasn't shy about it.
yes, no, that's great. Just like again, just opening up these discussions that just don't
Yeah.
exist. Right now, the conversation is just very much, like based on stereotypes and people that just don't know what is actually happening inside that relationship. Because I know, like, I'm just shifting gears to talk a little bit about this love versus arranged marriages. And I know, like, in my parents' generation, like when you heard about a divorce, they would be like, oh, they got divorced, but it was a love marriage. And so they didn't have that commitment that they needed. They just, they fell out of love, and that's so common. And I just want to get your perspective on this because the other side of that is the debate that, people in my generation have, where with second generation Indian Americans who are born and raised here, will be like, oh, that couple's divorced. Well, was it arranged? Oh, well, then of course they're divorced because they didn't love each other. Like you can't just put two people together and then be like, go find some shared hobbies and interests. So, and that's like, those are the conversations that I grew up listening to because we didn't have these examples and models and real life stories.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, yeah, what your take is on this, or if you've heard things like this.
No, it sounds very familiar.
Yeah.
Um, but here's the bottom line is everyone meets in different ways,
Yeah.
then and now. And if you connect emotionally,
Hmm.
physically, and have that commitment, and I mean, these are my therapist's words. These are not my words. We've talked about, and she's like, there's got to be 3 points where you
Yeah,
have to meet.
can you repeat those points again?
Sure.
Yeah.
You emotionally connect.
Yeah.
There's the passion, the physical side, and then the commitment,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
if those don't all get met, those needs don't get met, then something breaks in the relationship. And I don't think it matters if you're arranged or love. It can happen to either. And for example, like in our generation, what number one, what is arranged marriage at this point? Is it just a setup? Like, are you basically going on a blind date with someone that your parents know the family of, or somebody knows somebody? And are you still dating? What is that definition? I think that we have a say in an arranged marriage more so than maybe 2 generations ago, maybe even more than a generation ago.
Yeah.
So what's to say that's almost not like a love marriage anyways? In terms of the previous generation, um, I think their priorities might have been a little different. And I think that might be the reason why people say arranged versus love. Because what do families ask when they're arranging it in the previous generation? They ask, what kind of job do you have? How will you support my child? What can you do to provide support to my child if it's, the woman to the man? Um, because their focus was stability. And we're talking about the immigrant generation. Generation before that was the one coming out of World War II.
Yeah.
So stability was such a huge deal for both because there was so much change. Now,
Hmm.
us, on the other hand, we've settled into a place where we're stable if we're lucky. Our, parents have provided a great um, way for us to grow up. So
Yeah.
now our shift, like there's a shift in how our needs are met. We are no longer looking for just stability, but we're looking for the emotional connection.
That is so true. Yes. Because, yeah, you think about, how it's evolved, like you were saying with the Shadi.com or even shows like Indian matchmaking and how, you know, in in these conversations that we're having, you're thinking about like, okay, do we have this emotional connection? Do we have things that we like to do together?
Yep.
When you look at the passion, like, do we like each other? Like that initial connection that happens right when you meet someone and then you think about are we ready to do this in the long term, that commitment. And that actually goes back to, I was thinking about a theory I teach in my classes in San Jose State, and it's Sternberg's love triangle, and there's three elements of that triangle, and there's the passion, there's the intimacy, which is the emotional connection, and then there's the commitment piece. And so
Yep.
having those three elements is just so important. And it's harder if you just have one of those elements. So
And if you're looking for the well-rounded relationship, you have to have three. Now, I mean, you could easily be like, okay, the physical side does not matter to me, and
mhm.
I'm moving on. But I don't think that's most of us. So,
Oh, yeah, and it's hard work, right? So it's hard work to
yeah,
have all those three as well.
yeah.
So yeah, no, we just learned a lot already about relationships. So we're gonna go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we're gonna talk to Shailee a little bit more about what she went through when she started to think about getting a divorce. Stay tuned. And we're back. You're listening to Brownish Parenting with Dr. Amita on Ruckus Avenue. Now we're going to take a look at the process Shailee went through when she was getting that divorce. And I know for a lot of South Asians, it is very, very difficult when they're thinking through this process and figuring out like when that final straw is for them. They often feel like they're not sure, like when should they do this? Should they, stick with it? When do they realize that it's come to an end? And so, Shirley, if you're okay with walking us through that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing is that it becomes your emotions being stronger than your mind, where you just, you're at a point where it's just so miserable that the logical side is just gone. Like there's no, oh, I should stick to this. And, my family, his family, for the kids, if that's the situation, all of that kind of goes out the window because now it's a matter of your survival and your life versus, just sticking in it. And it sounds dire, but I think we are still at the point for South Asian Indians where we're waiting almost a little bit too late, where we're so deeply ingrained in this like world that we don't want to be in, and probably depressed, anxious, and a whole host of mental
Yeah.
health issues
Mhm.
before we even take the steps to get out. And sometimes that doesn't happen. I mean, I know we've heard a few stories over the last few years about people in postpartum depression and suicide and such things where instead of stepping away because it was looked down upon, they
Mhm.
chose to end it. And that really sucks because if we stop looking at divorce as like the last option or even not an option,
Yeah.
maybe we would all be happier or more emotionally stable in our lives. Um, and that's not to say that's the right choice always for everybody, and there should be a whole host of things that go happen before, therapy, couples therapy, trying to figure out is there a way to make it work? Definitely should be a priority. But there does come a point where you just, I think for me, it was a feeling of I can't be here anymore. I can't, like, we're talking how long of my life am I in this relationship? Because we're talking our whole lives.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like, if I'm 25, that's 50 more years I'm thinking I am with this person. And if I'm not happy, does that mean I have to be miserable for the next 50 years of my life? And this is prior to having kids and I mean, kids put stress on a marriage. They're not going to fix anything. They put stress on it, so it has to be strong going into it. Um, and so how do you bring kids into something where you are not, happy as a person with whatever is going on personally in your life?
Hmm.
Uh, so for me, yeah, it was just this moment, and I did not let it out. I For a long time I held it in. Um, And I finally went to visit a friend on a trip,
Yeah.
and we were having fun. We were going out. And one day I broke down. And then for the rest of the 2 days I was with her, this is all we talked about is what do I do? Because I am this miserable.
And so
And she's the one,
before telling this friend that this was all you kept this all within yourself.
yeah, no, I didn't. I mean, we presented a perfect picture. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
we were happy. We were happy. We were happy. And we had fights, but it wasn't a big deal. And no, I mean, I think, and it's no, I can't tell you if there was a specific cause, I couldn't define if there was emotional abuse or gaslighting.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no physical abuse, but like,
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you if there was or if it was just we were not right for each other
Yeah.
and we needed different things. And we got married so young that we hadn't developed fully as people. Um,
Yeah.
and so the idea is that, well, I made this choice. I've got to live with it. And I have no reason to really be upset. I am provided for, I get to do what I want. Like I was in a dance group at the time and nobody was stopping me.
Mhm.
I went out with my friends and I partied and I got to do everything I wanted to do. So why was I so miserable? But I think that it goes back to what are you expecting out of this marriage? What do you need personally out of the marriage? And for me, it's always been I need somebody to just be my support to emotionally back me up. I
Mhm.
can physically take care of myself and I can provide for myself financially because I have been given the education and the means to do so.
Yeah.
Um, but I need a partner. I
Mhm.
don't need a roommate. And I
Yeah.
need somebody to get me at my way on my wavelength, and understand why I do the things that I do.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that disconnect was definitely there. And so, yeah, at some point, I couldn't be there anymore. And I can't say there was one reason or 15 reasons. There just was this feeling of I cannot be there. Um, and that's when I broke down with my friend, and that's when I chose to leave.
Wow, yeah. So that must have felt like all this weight off your shoulder and just being able to tell someone, because my next question was about this, idea of coming out about your divorce to your community when there's these negative social repercussions. So just that feeling I'm sure that you had once you were able to tell your friend about this and
Yeah,
feel supported.
yeah,
Um, yeah, yeah.
feel
And
valid.
validated, yeah. And I'm wondering, I guess, if you also were like how you felt about telling your parents, because I know sometimes that can also be difficult if you don't know where they stand. And
I didn't 100% know how my parents would take it when I walked out. But I did go there
yeah,
and I just hoped that they would understand. Um, they've backed me up for other issues in my life before. They've always, supported it and knew what my decision was. They trusted it. They trusted me. Because by that point I had switched schools, I had switched majors, I had made big changes in my life
mhm,
without asking them. And I was like,
yeah,
this is just, I know. But again, those were very strong feelings for me. Like I know I'm not going down the path I'm supposed to be going down. And I just can feel it.
yeah,
Um, and I trusted that instinct. And so this was another instinct I was following. And I might have gotten really lucky because I know there are parents who are going to come and they're going to be like, you have to go back or that's it. You know,
Mhm.
there's no option.
Yeah.
Um, Mine didn't necessarily get it the first day. It took my mom maybe 2 to 3 days to come in and be like, you should have left him sooner. Because she's also very empathetic and she just could feel how I was feeling almost.
Yeah.
My dad took a few minutes longer, and I
Mhm.
think it was all that traditional upbringing. As liberal and open-minded as he is, it kicks in when something kind of throws a wrench in your path. And he had been raised that way, and the first thing that he had said was, well, what about your sisters? They still need to get married. And
Yeah.
that was the thought, like, well, who's going to want to marry into this family with this divorcee? Um,
Oh, yeah. And these old
but
school values that, right,
yeah,
have been ingrained in them since they were born and raised. And yeah.
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 But again, luckily, my dad he also can feel pretty hard. And I think it took him maybe a few weeks. And he had asked me something one of the days about my ex. And I cried to him about it. And
Yeah.
then I went out and I got a call from my mom, just like, I don't know what you said to him, but he completely gets it now. Because they also knew, I mean, I wasn't the type of person to just be like, I quit without
Mhm.
a reason. There's definitely reasons. I just don't know if I can explain to you what those are.
We're going to go on a break. And when we come back, we are going to talk about the messages we send our own children about marriage and divorce. Welcome back. You're listening to Brownish Parenting with Dr. Amita on Ruckus Avenue Radio. So, I wanted to get into some of the best practices for parents when we are thinking about the messages we send to our own kids when it comes to marriage and divorce. And so today, Shailee is married and she has her own kids. She has a daughter that's 10 and a son who's 7. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about, the types of conversations that you may have today after going through the experiences that you've been through and helping them understand healthy relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And because my daughter is entering
Mhm.
preteen crush territory, we
Yes.
have had these conversations because I don't want her to enter it without being aware, kind of the way we were. We didn't have very many discussions about relationships or what they should be, or. And
Mhm.
so we talk about it all the time, and it's the number one message is first find a way to love yourself, love your life, create a life that you are fully invested and interested in. That's priority.
Yeah.
It is not necessarily to find a partner.
So important because we were just talking about how a lot of times the messages maybe we were raised with were parents saying like, oh, we'll be happy when you get married or you'll feel more complete, everything will be set for you when you find that partner. And so really helping children understand that you don't need another person to complete you
No.
and you don't need this other person to make you happy. Because I still hear that today with a lot of teens that they just, they're like, oh, well, I just want this boyfriend or I just want this girlfriend because it'll just make me feel more safe and secure. But you have to
Yeah.
feel safe and secure being with yourself and being you and, figuring out what makes you tick, right?
And
Thank you for that.
do things that you love, right? Number one, I mean, I'm a solid believer that if you're doing what you love, you will attract the right person
Hmm.
to you at that time because you're going to be in your happiest zone. Every person that comes in and out of your life, friends, family, whatever, they have their moments in your life. And either it sticks or it doesn't. And sometimes you grow apart, sometimes things happen. But I think the more things you put on what a relationship should look like, the less time you'll have to enjoy what it actually is.
Yes, yes. I love how you called it the happy, you said happy zone, right? That you need to be
Yeah,
in your own happy zone. And
I met my husband right now throwing a dance show. And if there is not a place where I am in my most happy place,
yeah,
I mean, that's it. Like, it makes sense to me that this is how we met because I was in my element doing something I absolutely love to do. And that is still a very big part of my mental health in my life now.
Yeah.
Um, and that is what he saw is not me loving dance, but me feeling confident about myself, me loving something with a passion, me being able to share that with, a community. That's what he saw, at least I assume. Um,
Yes.
but
And then that emotional connection, right? That you were
that
talking
emotion,
about before, and
yeah,
you immediately felt that because they were here's somebody that's interested in the same interests as you and being with you because you're doing what you love. Yeah,
yeah,
that's great.
so,
And I kind of want to just like end our conversation here with just understanding relationship education before getting into a relationship. And that's kind of what we were talking about, right? Like how we're talking to these preteens about understanding themselves, but then also understanding if they like someone, like what does that mean in terms of their interests, hobbies. I wanted to talk a little bit about these 7 phases or stages of marriage to create these realistic expectations for the relationships that we're in. And, I know you're married as well. So I thought we would just kind of talk a little bit about the stages first and then kind of think through like maybe where maybe it got difficult for you when you were thinking about also your divorce, but how you relate to this in a marriage today, as well as me. So I also, again, once I learned about these, it was very eye-opening for me. And this is from Dr. De Maria's book on the 7 stages of marriage. And so the first stage is passion. And this is that honeymoon phase where you are falling in love. It's all about that passion, right? You see the person you love. There's lots of endorphins released. There's not really any arguments. It's all good.
yeah,
So we're going to move to the second stage. There's this realization stage where you start to take those blindfolds off. You're really getting to know this person, becoming friends with them. You realize that they're not perfect and that there is some good and bad. Now, the third stage is the rebellion stage. And this one is probably one of the most difficult stages. There's a lot of internal crisis and disappointment because you see a lot more imperfections than before. Your self-interest take over. This is also a lot of times when individuals have children. So you're also maybe going through that, but you're thinking about like your own interests and you're thinking about, do you love them enough to accept them for who they are? And the US Census here into 2021 looks at how, first marriages last only 8 years. And this is typically like the rebellion stage is the 7-year itch period that typically we talk about. And that the average age for divorce is 30. So in the first 2 stages, like the passion and realization, you could still kind of ignore the problems. You can kind of just kind of put them off, like that's okay. Maybe it'll get better, but then in this stage, this is where it typically you need to have a lot more negotiation, compromise, things like that. The fourth stage is cooperation, where you're overcoming the internal crisis. Maybe you've survived that roller coaster ride, and now you are raising children together. There is definitely a lot more increased responsibility when you think about like the work that you're doing, raising the children. So it could feel more like a business partnership. And so this is where it's really going to be important to prioritize your relationship and date nights. I kind of feel like I'm probably in this cooperation stage right now. And then the reunion is when your kids leave the nest and you have this empty nest syndrome. You're starting to like reunite as a couple because again, the children are gone. You're focusing on the relationship and communication. And then sixth stage is the explosion stage where this can actually happen at any period of time. And it's these external crises that come into play in your relationship. So unexpected situations. And so there could be illness, unemployment, changes at work, death of a parent, caregiving to aging parents, which can also make couples feel like they just want to escape because there's just so much going on, and which I've also, again, experienced periods, again, of explosion as well. And then completion stage is sort of that mature love. Your intimacy is really strong. This is the very last stage, and only a third of marriages last this long. You've kind of lived through those internal, struggles and external struggles. And now you start to do things like maybe volunteering together, starting a side business, I don't know, gardening, things like that. But So again, in real life, it's not going to be as linear, but you are going to see that every relationship kind of goes through this ebb and flow, this push and pull. And so I just thought let you maybe speak to like any of the stages that you felt like you could connect to.
Well, in terms of my first marriage, I actually think we did not get past the rebellion stage. I think that's where we were stuck, and I think part of that is just we were so young. Um, and there's just so much fairy tale romance that you kind of built into the expectations. And when it crashes, you realize, wait, we're two full-on separate, different people.
Yeah.
Again, and we're not completely done growing. Like whoever thinks we're supposed to be complete at 22, I mean, no, adulthood is still coming, and there's a lot of building to do, I think, at that point. Um, and I mean, you still grow obviously as you get older, but you adjust to it better because you've dealt with more. Um, but in terms of currently, I think we would be in the cooperation stage, raising the kids. And a major part of our relationship is focusing on ourselves. If we find that we're drifting, we definitely schedule time to, take a weekend away. But on a regular basis, we go and we connect, weekly, if not more than once a week. And we talk and sometimes, I mean, it's just this is how my day is going. Sometimes it's more than that. And I think number one, we're providing that model for our kids to
Yes.
start with.
Yeah.
But it's important because I know how easy, and especially as a mom, to put my kids first to a point where I've lost myself,
Mhm.
and that includes within a relationship. And lucky for me that my husband definitely has taught me to make us a priority, that the kids can go and spend time with their grandparents, which they love.
Yeah.
And so we take our time and go hang out with each other. I do look forward to the the stage where we get to go take weird, fun classes together at, the community college and go travel randomly to places that we might not have with our kids. That being said, we also do prioritize that. Like I've wanted to learn Kathak forever, so I am doing that right now. My husband has wanted to learn tabla since he was a kid.
Yeah.
He is doing that right now. So our schedules are insane, but at no point are we putting aside everything we want just to raise kids. We are finding ways to work with what we want, with what they want and what they need, and put it all together. Now, it makes everything a little chaotic sometimes, but at least we're living without regret.
Yes, and they're seeing their parents as the happy parents that are able to parent them and again fulfill their own needs of self-love, self-care,
Mhm.
being in that happy zone, and doing all of this. So this we're going to break, and when we come back, we're going to share some key insights from our discussion here today with Shailee. And so we are at the end of our segment here today. So I just wanted to connect back with Shailee and find out if you had any other advice for someone that's listening today and thinking about getting a divorce.
First and foremost, I'd say just trust yourself, trust your feelings, trust your emotions. Most of the time, if you feel like there's that little thought of maybe this is something you should think about, I'd say explore it. And it doesn't have to be some loud noise, but get yourself a therapist, whether you have made the decision or not, and start talking to somebody who has no relation to you or your community directly and is professionally educated to give you that feedback or walk you through it. Stock in what you want out of life, and why you might be feeling this way. Don't ignore red flags and don't ignore feelings that come up because anything you feel is valid. And I'd say don't let anybody tell you it's not. A lot of us, I think, shove down our feelings. We hear, oh, well, it's okay if he parties once in a while with his friends. It's not that big a deal. It's okay if, you know, somebody lies to you. It's you have a negative feeling about any of these things, explore it, talk to somebody about it, figure out why it affects you so much. And then make a decision based on your collective knowledge of what you've explored. And then find your support group, find your village for this, the people you can go to. None of us can get through something this heavy and this hard alone. Most of us, when we choose divorce, it is a last resort choice. This is not something we on a whim decided. And I think our community is still getting to a point where they need to understand that it's a hard decision to make. None of us we woke up one morning and said, I don't want to be with this person anymore because it's no fun. It's
Yeah,
not worth it. It's not worth that. Going through the divorce, and let me put this out there because I think I didn't expect this,
yeah.
is the second you go through the divorce, you're
Mhm.
not going to bounce back and be whole again. It's going to take time. And it took me 9 more months to reach my rock bottom after leaving. And that's when I started to fight for myself, and it slowly built back up from there. And it still took another year and a half before I felt like myself again. Um,
And that's what, yes. And I think it was either in your book or something I was reading. Basically, the assumption is that once you get a divorce, you feel like you're going to feel better. And
yeah,
you actually haven't even hit rock bottom until after you've made that decision. And you feel a lot worse and I know you're nodding, yes. So, oh my goodness, that is what it really, that journey entails.
yeah. And so build the support around you because you're
Yes.
going to need it. It's
Yeah.
not just going to be magically, I'm happy. I mean, and you can rush into another relationship, you can go out and party, you can do all these things you thought you wanted to do, but at your core, that's not being healed. That's just surrounding yourself with noise. So it takes time. It takes time and rebuilding and a lot of therapy and a lot of time with your friends and family that do support you before you fully feel like yourself again. But it is possible. And it's possible to thrive out of it. So,
Yeah.
if that's what you think you need to go through to find yourself to be, you at your best, then maybe that's exactly what needs to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Shaylee, I want to thank you for the conversations that we've had here today. Like, we have been able to break that silence around this topic of divorce. We're starting to normalize these conversations for other South Asian Americans. And, when I was looking for a guest for this podcast, I knew South Asians that have been divorced, but there weren't very many that really wanted to openly talk about their experiences as openly and honestly and authentically as you have here today. I think we've learned a lot from everything you've shared. So I just want all of the listeners that are listening to know again that they are supported by you and by the Brownish community. And a takeaway is again that divorce is an option for Indians. It's not something that should be highly stigmatized and taboo. And if it's something that someone feels like they need support with, that I hope that they know that it doesn't have to be that they have to like disassociate from their South Asian identity to feel like that they can do this, but that we as South Asian Americans, we as the Brownish community, are here to help support, guide individuals to critically think through relationships. And that's why we brought in the 7 phases and stages of marriage. We want individuals to feel like the relationships they're in are making them better at who they are and physically, emotionally, having the 3 elements that we talked about with Sternberg's love triangle, the passion, the intimacy, the commitment, and to talk to our kids about this, because imagine if we had this knowledge when we were dating. And so, with that, I would love to thank Shaylee for being here with us today. And Shaylee, if listeners want to stay in touch with you, how can they reach you?
Sure. My Instagram handle is at Shailee Mehta Writes. You can reach me there.
So next week, we are actually going to be talking with a divorce therapist about some of the best practices when you think about post-divorce co-parenting, and a little bit more about healthy relationships. So please stay tuned for that and DM me any questions you have to my Instagram handle at Dr. Amita Roy Shah so we can ask our guest any of the questions that you have. Thank you very much. Stay tuned.